creation has been on this planet, if you take the evolutionary model to be true. So the beginning of creation, in this case, if you were to say that it's evolution, would be about 98% through with the process of creation, and the lifespan that we see with creation today. So in conclusion, we have a 24-hour day through Yom, where we use the context to discern what the Hebrew means in Genesis. We have death before the fall, which is the main inconsistency which stems massive problems for many doctrines throughout Scripture. And you have all the little inconsistencies that are sprinkled throughout the rest of Scripture. Mainly Jesus' teachings, the formation of man, and the restoration of paradise, where we look to the future and can only see death using theistic evolution. Thank you.
Wonderful job. You have a natural gift as a public speaker, so very, very well done. I appreciate all the specifics and really enjoyed reading your paper as well. The thing that I walked away with was reinforced in my mind is that when we all get to heaven, we're going to realize how wrong we all were. that we don't know as much as we think we know, no matter where you fall on this topic or a whole bunch of others. There's going to be a big eye-opening, I'm sure. What led you to want to do this topic?
I already was familiar with some of the arguments, and when I originally took this, and I think Mr. Kautz knows this, is I wanted to talk about theistic evolution when I took this topic, and I realized that someone else in our class actually had the more specific topic of theistic evolution.
Okay.
So I took the length of the days thinking that was the whole thing. So I wanted to talk about theistic evolution with this paper because I was familiar with most of the arguments surrounding it.
And when you use the term theistic evolution, when you use it in the paper, I assume that you mean macroevolution. So
Yes.
one species to another species.
Yes.
Okay. So very broad question. See how to frame this. How do you see, what I'm going to get to is how do you characterize the book of Genesis, okay? And when I ask that question, what I mean to say is it the same in its approach to topics, the way it's laid out, as the New Testament? Is it the same as the Gospel of John? Is it the same as Acts? Is it the same as Isaiah? Are there differences in the books of the Bible, and how do you characterize the book of Genesis?
I think there are certainly differences in the way books are written. There are some that are meant to be poetry a bit, but I think this is what you're getting at, is that maybe Genesis is poetry. I don't know if that's... Could be. So the way I see Genesis is through historical narrative based on the language surrounding it and the references used in the rest of the Bible toward it. But to answer your question, I certainly think that there are different ways that books of the Bible can be written. For instance, Psalms seems to be mostly poetry. So when you take some verses from there, you have to be very careful how you apply them because they're mainly metaphorical in most instances.
And did you take Greek here at
No,
Veritas? You did. Okay. I was going to ask, so how, when you look at the Greek language, I did study Greek, and one of the one thing the professor said that really stood out was, with language comes worldview. Have you studied foreign language?
Yes.
Okay. Which one?
French and Spanish.
Okay. So,
And Latin.
do you have you gotten to the point where you think in Spanish, or do you have to?
No.
Yeah. And that you have to be real good to get to that point. But the Greek language is an incredibly precise language, and lines up a little more with our Western worldview. The Old Testament, obviously in Hebrew, and I really enjoyed the way you looked at Yom. But Genesis, well, the whole Old Testament, but Genesis in particular, I think, and I'm putting words in your mouth and you can react to this. Genesis has a textbook that God is explaining exactly how he created, and that's how we're supposed to view it. See, I think we're coming from a Western worldview, a New Testament worldview, looking back on ancient Near East text, that we're trying to make it do something it's not trying to do. So, does that make sense?
So, I think your question, or your, I guess, statement is that Genesis is, when we look at Genesis from our modern and like westernized view of language, that we see it as something that's not meant to be interpreted as?
Right. What I'm basically, and you can react to it, you already have in your paper to a degree, I don't think God was telling us it's absolutely critical that you believe in a 24-hour day, because the author, that would have been the furthest thing from their mind. They're not writing a textbook. They're saying God is the creator. And I can say from my viewpoint, there's a lot I don't know, and I don't know how God did it. And it's not really all that important to me. So.
Right, well, I kind of addressed that in the introduction to my paper, where I talk about how it's, many Christians, and I think maybe an example of this, where you don't see it as that big of a deal. And it's true, it's not as big of a deal as some of the other doctrines in Genesis, but I think there is a danger when you look at it, especially from theistic evolution, which I don't think you're defending at all. When you have theistic evolution, it may cause you, since you have an inconsistent worldview, to go down a path where you start to doubt God. So I think mainly the reason people want to argue about a 24-hour versus billions of years is because some people, like myself, see it as a literal interpretation. And I think with billions of years, there are two motives to that. And I don't know what you may believe it to be, but I think it's either to insert evolution, which is theistic evolution, or to explain the age of the Earth that we see, or starlight and stuff like that. And that's why I wanted when I started this writing this thesis, I wanted to talk about theistic evolution, so I spent 2/3 of my paper on that, and one on contextualizing day.
Right.
So I wasn't really trying to tackle all of the different views of Lord creationism, but I can certainly discuss them with you right now.
No, that's great.
All right, thank you, Micah. I appreciate this topic greatly. It was the topic that God used to bring me into the faith. So I'm very much a young Earth creationist, and but I also like it to be argued well. Okay, so anytime it's argued, I'm not saying you're doing it incorrectly or inadequately. We will see. We will see how it goes. But I think it's always helpful for us to have our positions critiqued and then improved in how we present them. So that's the spirit with which I'm approaching this interaction. Do clarify though, when you argue in the future, pick the term old Earth or theistic evolution. Do not go back and forth because they're very different.
Right.
So just pick one, which I think your old Earth. The paper position you're critiquing in the paper is just the length of day. It's not the mechanism that God would have used to bring about certain creatures.
Yeah, it's kind of a mix of both, which is...
You gotta pick one, because old Earth people don't hold to that, and theistic evolutionists do. So we'll just assume it's old Earth. That's it, okay? Are you okay with that?
Are you saying that
you're critiquing old Earth in the paper?
I'd say it's more a paper about theistic evolution.
All right, fine. That's fine. Okay. The Yom thing is fine. I love this discussion greatly. So it's interesting. So I'm just going to read some statements and let's have it out here. Okay, the only time the words are called into question, yom, the only time it's called into question is in Genesis 1, when it has a number associated with it. Right? Every other instance in the Bible can be easily interpreted, but not in Genesis 1.
Yeah.
All right, Hosea 6:2. After 2 days will he revive us. In the third day he will raise us up, and we shall live in his sight. What day is that? What kind of day is that?
I think that's the prophecy referring to Jesus' teaching where he says in 2 days the temple will be destroyed, and in the third I will raise it again. I think that's.
Right, are these literal days, these 24-hour days?
Don't think so.
Well, if there's a number associated with it, you said whenever there's a number associated with it, it's 24 hours.
Right. Well, I think also with those modifiers, you have to take into account the context.
Okay, so here's my point. Here's my point.
Right, so-
Okay, so Hosea seems to be an exception to your rule, which you said there were no exceptions.
Okay.
Okay, so now there are exceptions. But someone could respond to you and say, well, wait a minute, Micah. Every other use of yom with number is 24 hours, so that must be 24 hours. And then you would have to say, you're right, so I must take that then as 24 hours.
Well, I think you can't just, and I may have accidentally said this in my thesis and also in my presentation, that you can only look at the modifiers, but I think I tried to make it clear in this that you can also, you also have to take into account the context, as I said with his question before, that there's some entire books of the Bible that are mainly poetry. So I think that there are definitely instances where that you could make an exception in some cases based on the language surrounding it.
So would you you appeal to Jesus using this, for the temple being destroyed and being raised up. So you would agree that in our English translations, which most of us are not scholars in Hebrew or Greek, but I'm a firm believer that the general truths of the Bible get through in any English translation. I don't need my Greek, help guide to come to know that Jesus is the Son of God. Okay? It accurately portrayed that meaning. All right, so you agree then that when day is used in the New Testament and when day is used in the Old Testament, that we can assume that the Hebrew word and the Greek word are used in somewhat similar ways. You would concede that?
Yes, depending on the context.
So in Revelation now, Revelation 9:15, what day is this? And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year, for to slay the third part of man. What day is that?
Well, I think this is from Revelation, so it's speaking about the second coming, and
The whole book?
well, is this part, I'm not.
This is chapter 9.
Chapter 9, okay. So what is I'm not familiar with certain chapters, I guess a lot of
And
chapters
that's
of the
my
Bible.
point. That's my point in this, right? So if we say, if your argument hinges upon there are no exceptions to day with number, then, and then I give exceptions, then what's left of your argument for yom?
Well, again, it's all about, as I tried to make clear, that it's context and these modifiers combined together. If you have some poetic statement which says 3 days, I guess this is kind of changing what I said in my thesis where there are no exceptions. But you have to take into account the context of what it's talking about. This is, I think from this is the angels coming and a day, a month, a year. I'm not very familiar with this.
It's talking about a judgment that's going to come.
The judgment. So
it's not so much the number that's important, it's the evening and the morning with it.
yeah, I guess you could
So
say
you
that.
can throw out the whole argument then with the number, because that's not really relevant. Because
Well, I think you can use the numbers as a modifier, which it does add some more meaning to what you say if you just say days rather than a number of days. You're giving
But if
us
I ask you though,
specific-
like if I pick out any one randomly and say, is that one 24 hours, you'd have to agree that number isn't sufficient to communicate that, because I've given you exceptions. You'd have to look at something else around it. which I think I would infer then that I don't really need to know if there's a number associated with it. I should just look for other modifiers.
Well, I think it's a combination of everything when you're trying to
See where this would go though, okay? So you say number, I give you exceptions, and then you appeal to something else. You move the little pebble instead of the, okay, moving these things around. So then I ask you, if we could get to evening and morning, let's say I hit that, and then you said, but you gotta look at the context. And I said, I think that's what we're doing, okay? And then we keep going. Eventually, like if we keep knocking these down, it would undo at least the force of the presentation. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, so at some point you're gonna have to stop this, right? You can't just concede the number, concede evening and morning. Because at that point, the context has been removed, and we don't know what it means.
Okay.
Okay, so let's go to, I just want to clarify, the whole Adam was Neanderthal, this is just a separate point. Where did you read that? That they believe Adam was a Neanderthal? Because I've never read that before. I always read that Neanderthals turned into humans, but they were subhuman.
I guess I took the liberty of stating Neanderthal is the evolved form of an ape.
So that wasn't something you read, that was just...
No, that was more just like the term Neanderthal. I didn't really use it as its evolutionary definition, which is
Okay.
that.
Okay, I would have wanted to see it if you did, so that's why
Gotcha.
I asked it. All right, animal death, I love this. Okay, I love this topic. Let's get into this very briefly. So animal death is not very good. Do you eat meat?
Yes, because God commands it. God allows it after I think the flood.
Okay, so why, Micah, is this outlawed prior to the fall? And then the fall happens, and all of a sudden, like, harming animals is okay. But nothing else really changed, apparently, in God's law. Like, killing prior to the fall, if Adam would have murdered Eve, that would have been bad, obviously, right? And if you did it after the fall, it would have been bad. If you would have, stolen something, that would have been bad. Like, nothing really changed just because we're sinners, pre-fall, post-fall, as far as God's law, as far as we can tell.
Right.
But eating of meat has changed. Why would he do that to these animals?
I think that introducing a meat to our diet I think that's one of the mysteries of Genesis. So I don't know if I don't think I have a good answer for why God would suddenly include after all this time. Because, again, most...
So is it good today to eat meat? Is it acceptable?
Yes.
Why can't we do that for the new heavens and new earth
then? Well, God says that there will be no violence and there will be no death.
Why would he say that? Is that just an arbitrary thing that he picked? Apparently it doesn't matter. Maybe I'm sitting in a tree, mowing down animals in the new heavens and new earth. And, that's just what I do. And I like Esau, run around and eat. And I'm redeemed, of course, but why is that okay now? But then when we get, it's moral now, it's completely acceptable. It's an enjoyable thing. On a nice summer day, I can cook hamburgers and have a beverage, and that's a wonderful way to enjoy my freedom. But in the new heavens and new earth, I can't.
Well, I think it's because God commands it. It's because God says it in after the fall. He says, "You may eat meat," and then I think you're asking why does God do what He does? And I think it's because He's God and we don't know the reason.
It would seem to take away the force of the argument that animal death is really that bad. If we concede that it's not a big deal now, and we eat it and so forth, it's a fine thing. From what you're giving me, it would seem that prior to the fall, it just happened to be the way it was. And now there is death. That's okay, because we enjoy meat. But then later on, he'll change it again. It just doesn't seem like there's a real good reason for why it's shifting.
Well, I think there doesn't seem to be a good reason for a lot of things in Scripture. And if you just chalk it up to, well, I'm not given all the information, so I don't see it as as necessary or true, then you can, if you were to apply that to a lot of other things in Scripture, it would kind of defeat your faith.
That's fine, we can leave that. I wanna continue on with the death part. So you read Romans 5:12. By one man, sin came into the world and death by sin. So all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Okay, so it's a wonderful verse by Paul. And when you read that, it reminds me of when I was in college at St. John's, and this liberal got up, and it's always a touchy-feely, like, hey, can we all just love everyone and, not be divisive, like Jesus is the only way, that's really impressive, that stuff. So he gets up and he says, John 3:17, for God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, no, but that the world through him might be saved. And then he stopped, and as a 22-year-old, I'm irate, like sitting in my chair, just like, I can't believe this is going on. What do you think the next verse says? You familiar with this?
No.
Okay, so it would seem to say, like, well, yeah, Jesus didn't come to condemn the world, which would seem to say, like, he's not really a condemning person, right? That's what he wanted us to infer from that. But yeah, verse 18 says, and there's a reason why he doesn't read this verse, it says, he that believeth on him is not condemned, but he that believeth not is condemned already. Of course Jesus wouldn't come to condemn the world, it's already condemned. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so it's deceptive for him not to read verse 18, but just to read verse 17, when 18 would refute everything he's trying to imply.
Okay, so I'm assuming that there's a verse coming up.
Yes,
So
very good. You must be educated at Veritas. Good. Romans chapter 5, verse 14. Okay, so it talks about 5:12, says that, I'll read it again. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin. So the question is, what is this death that entered by man? And so what is this passage referring to? Is it the death of animals, or is it just the death of man? And so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. So it applies it to man in the actual verse. And then later, or 13 and 14, for until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over them that had not sinned, after the similitude of Adam's transgression, who is the figure of him that was to come. Like the whole passage is applying death to humans.